Hello, and welcome to the Media Copilot. It's a podcast that explores how AI is changing media, journalism, and content creation. I'm Pete Pachal, longtime tech journalist and founder of the Media Copilot, and I'm excited to bring you fascinating conversations with fellow journalists, media executives, and the people building how the business of news will work in the future. Today, I'm excited to talk to Clare Spencer. Clare's been working with AI in newsrooms longer than most of us. As a journalist and producer at the BBC, she was part of a team building prototypes with GPT-3 long before ChatGPT was a thing. She's seen the rise of generative AI and what it means for media up close, and she's thought a lot about the ethical challenges it presents for reporters. Recently, she's developed a passion for AI powered revisioning, essentially using AI to reformat a piece of content into a completely different medium. Since leaving the BBC, she's been working on a product that takes an audio podcast and turns it into an article, or a video, or a series of videos. It's kind of like Google Notebook LM in reverse, but it's more than that. We're talking about a kind of content polymorph, essentially using the power of AI to reimagine the underlying information and turn it into any format the creator or the listener might like. That idea, it obviously has huge implications for media, and it gets at some fundamental issues around transparency and integrity, two things very important to journalism. We get into it. It was a really illuminating conversation, and I hope you listen to the end where Claire shares what I think is a very smart policy for newsrooms that want to use generative images, but might not be entirely comfortable with it. Of course, if you do enjoy the conversation, I'd encourage you to share it with a friend or a colleague, and I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing to the Media Copilot newsletter, if you haven't already. The link's in the show notes. I'd also really appreciate it if you leave a rating and review in whatever podcast app you're in. Those really do help the show get in front of more people. And last, you can check everything that we offer, including AI training classes for media, marketing, and PR professionals at mediacopilot.ai. Okay, here's my conversation with Clare Spencer, former BBC journalist and AI newsroom leader. Claire, welcome to the Media Copilot.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we'll just dive into it. So tell me, obviously you're now immersed in this idea of taking podcasts, reinventing them in different ways. So tell me about what the goal is here of this team and this project that you're doing, and how are you applying AI?
Yeah. So it started when I was a documentary uh, producer, radio documentary producer for Radio 4 and BBC World Service. And there I would make half-hour documentaries. At that point in time, we had 3 weeks to make a half-hour radio documentary.
Oh wow,
Um,
yeah,
yeah.
those are the days.
But once you'd made it, you were then expected to um, reversion it in lots of different ways. And if you didn't, then you were really restricting your audience. So, for example, I took one which was called "Don't Hide My Son," where um, it was a half-hour radio documentary. But I also did a 500-word feature article. I also did the script for the news bulletin of the update from the fallout from that documentary for both the TV bulletin for Focus on Africa TV and the Swahili version of that as well. That there was a Swahili version of the text article. There was a 3-minute version which was played in a magazine show we have in the UK called Women's Hour. There was oh god, it went on and on and on, and it was just you'd write one story and then you'd have to reversion it in all these different versions and platforms. And the platforms were always changing. Uh, and also, even within the platforms, their algorithms were always changing. So um, the types of content that they would push into people's feeds would change. So it was really overwhelming to keep up with that and to reversion this content. And to be honest, all I wanted to do is concentrate on my story, getting my facts right, getting the best
Mhm.
interviews, getting the best editing, making sure I tell that story well once. But I had to do it many, many times. So that's where the inspiration came from. And I went to an audio production company and uh, explained this idea that now, I mean, that was, oh gosh, like 5, 7, 8 years ago, I think, where that idea came from. And now we have all these generative AI tools. I was thinking, wow, it'd be really interesting, wouldn't it, if there was any help we could get with this within the realms of factual content making, where
Mhm.
we have these specific ch- challenges, where we have these specific challenges to do with accuracy, and generative AI, of course, adds in errors. So that's the
Mhm.
if you can find the real sweet spot within your workflow where it's safe to use generative AI, um, without creating extra work for yourself by mitigating the risks of adding errors, then that is quite
Yeah.
exciting. So that's what I wanted to do. The audio production company got some funding, brought me in. I built a team, and it was just me, a developer, and a designer. And already, we've only been going a few weeks. We built really quickly, and we tested really quickly. So we've already tested our first version of this tool. Um, and
And what does the tool do exactly? So
so,
you have a finished product of some kind, and then it does a great deal of that previously manual reversioning for you, correct?
yeah, so you upload your audio. So maybe you upload an hour of audio, and then it suggests ideas for using that audio. So one is a quote on an Instagram square video, another is a 9 by 16. You know, everyone wants these 9 by 16 videos right now. The For
Mm.
TikTok reel and reels, um and so this is specifically for people who do not, unlike you, do not film their podcasts. And
Right.
what we found with some user research was there are people right now who do not film their podcasts for editorial reasons, not for technical reasons, because they
Not
don't want
because forgot to shower that day.
yeah. It's actually, yes, one person told me they do an interview show, and they feel it's more intimate. They
Mhm.
manage to People manage to open up more. I mean, when you
That's fair. Yeah, I can see that.
I did take a little sweep around my room today just to make sure it's tidy enough, and think you saw me at the beginning, like, just moving a few bits, so
I
I
know
wouldn't
my
have had to
audience
do that.
appreciates that. Thank you. They
Yeah, so they are these podcasters who are making content and don't intend to ever film. But
Mhm.
the problem is we have these platforms which really push video content. So what do you do in that circumstance? And this is where generative AI comes in. You can now generate content inspired by your previous content. Now, video generation is a bit of a wild west at the moment. It's a bit
Mhm.
variable, I'd say. So we've done a few bits
Sure.
where we've actually done some prototypes, and then used generative AI for the prototypes, but then made our video by coding. So
Got it. Let's be specific about what we're talking about here. So
yeah,
you're creating visual content to accompany the podcast.
yeah.
Now, are we talking about pure generative video, or are we talking about B-roll that is assembled or picked by AI? Are we talking about cloned likenesses of the people talking? And maybe it's all three, and maybe it depends on the preference. I don't know. But what is the visual content exactly?
This is my favorite subject right now, because we've had to, like, really break down the parts and only use generative AI for certain parts. So using it for the backgrounds, right? But for
Mhm.
example, it's rubbish at doing text on images.
Oh, is it ever?
Yeah. So it's always there's this saying, what's easy is hard and hard is easy. So this is the area. So we did the prototype in generative AI, showed it to the users. They said, "Oh, we definitely want that. We want to share that." And then the software engineer, he's got 25 years experience as a software engineer. He's like, "I can just code that. I can just do it." And he for the words on the video.
Right.
So
This is honestly a thing that just it really annoys me that they haven't sort of figured this out both for image generation and video generation, because I understand the nature of a diffusion model and that it's not, layering text on something. It's doing things pixel by pixel and it's trying to work the text into that. But why do you, as a tool, restrict yourself to that, right? Like, why not, let generative AI do what it does best and generate the imagery, And then obviously this is a more complicated thing, but yeah, I think this is where ultimately things are going to head. And then something else puts the text on that isn't doing it in the same sort of diffusive way. Again, I'm not an engineer. I don't fully understand the complexities of either process, but it just seems like that's logically what should be done. And
To
it sounds
us.
like that's exactly what you got your team's figuring out.
Yeah, I agree with you completely, but I think we're probably from very similar backgrounds, so it's so clear to us, and that's the issue, isn't it? Sometimes with generative AI is that it's not, it's not. It's made for these tools are often made for everyone, and they're not customized yet, and they're not thinking of their specific users. So there's so much opportunity still for customizing these tools to work specifically for podcasters where accuracy is really important. You can't possibly
Mhm.
put a spelling mistake on an Instagram grid. But maybe that wasn't prioritized. I don't know why they haven't done that. It is quite surprising, I think, that we had to do that work. But
Mm.
that was one of the things we learned. And it does surprise me some of the things that work and some of the things that don't work. Um, yeah, in
Yeah.
generative AI. Yeah, but
Well, it's also interesting with now that AI is becoming a bigger process on you mentioned Instagram, and it's kind of funny, like, I think about, a lot of the AI generated captioning, which is obviously super common now, and is getting better, but there's always a certain amount of mistakes it makes, particularly when you're talking about very sort of specific things. But I also feel like because now audiences are so used to seeing those mistakes, they're like more forgiving in many cases. So they just sort of get it. Oh, these were generated, and I'm not sure how much that's trickling back up to whether it's an individual creator or a newsroom or a media organization of l- essentially putting a disclaimer that these are AI generated and they might not be perfect. No, I'm talking specifically about captioning, right? We can talk
yeah,
more broadly about AI disclosures and what those should look like in various places. But I feel like the audiences are getting used to a certain amount of imperfection in certain uses of it. Does that fair to say? Is that your experience? And, I know I'm sort of, by extension, suggesting almost a relaxation of standards in a sense. That's not quite what I'm doing, but I kind of feel like the world's heading there. I don't know. What do you think?
I think there is a difference in expectations of journalists and expectations of audience members, and then
Right.
journalists are sometimes different to the general audience, so they tend to be sticklers for spelling.
We're
In this
perfectionists.
in this world of audio,
Well,
I
there's a lot of spelling that matters that AI gets wrong, mostly proper names.
mm,
Like
yeah,
those matter a lot, and it's very hard to know every single name and an AI how it's spelled, right? So you definitely have to go in and correct some of that for sure.
yeah. It reminds me of when lockdown happened, and
Mhm.
we had quite strict. I used to have to go out, and when I was making these radio documentaries, if I could go out face to face and record face to face, or they come into the studio. But we wouldn't really want to do it, over like this way, for example. And I think when lockdown happened, that was the only option. For this is for like BBC, right? And
Yeah, sure.
I think that the audience didn't complain. I don't know
Mhm.
because so then I thought,
They did, you
was it
didn't hear about it.
only ever the sound engineers who really cared about that stuff?
Yeah.
So like a fundamental question. I don't. We can kind of have hunches about, but it'd be really good to know the go a bit more scientifically into what is the answer in terms of what do the audience really care about with accuracy? What do the audience really care about with quality? Um, and I think
I think they in my view generally, I think, and this is based on my experience and just sort of observing media over the past few years, is that they do care about accuracy, they don't care so much about quality. And
mm,
I think the evidence I would point to for that is TikTok, where TikTok came out. There's very It's what you, I think, in the business would refer to as lo-fi content primarily, and just creators making videos, playing themselves, often in bad lighting and clumsy edits. But viewers don't care, and in fact, that sort of style became sort of a signature style of the platform. And the idea of sort of lower quality content, but the accuracy and the things they're saying are good, then they'll forgive that, right? And I do feel like that is a good lesson for the media broadly, in terms of what you're talking about is like, what does the audience care about and how do I meet them where they are? It doesn't mean we apply TikTok standards to everything, but it is like when you're talking about specific platforms and even specific products you're offering, concentrating your fire so you get good ROI. I mentioned captions. Another one might be transcripts. So
Mm,
it's like you're doing a transcript of an interview. I don't know if you necessarily have to have go through it with a fine tooth comb to make sure it's perfect.
mm,
It's more like put a disclaimer on this was generated by some AI. There might be inaccuracy or there might be problems with pronunciation or whatever,
yeah,
which tends to happen if you use like Otter or something like that. Anyway,
yeah.
sorry. I'm just sort of giving my view on sort of like what um how sort of things are evolving because ultimately I think when you're applying AI to processes like this, you're looking for efficiencies. And a big question that comes in on most processes like, well, to what point does the human in the loop on it lead to a negative ROI? In other words, you might as well just do the manual process if you're spend a great deal of time cleaning up what the AI does, and that might be different for different things. And this is probably where I'd want to probe your previous experience at NewsQuest, and maybe there were experiments, but um, what are some good takeaways from that, right? Because obviously you're applying AI to various
Mm,
processes. I'd love you to start with thinking about um, those efficiencies. Like where did you
yeah,
find the most um, gains, I guess, on that ROI, and what did you have to sort of adjust in terms of process or expectations?
yeah. So it's interesting that you say often that it's efficiency. So we can go two ways, can't we? We can implement AI in order to bring in efficiencies, or we can implement it to bring in transformation and to do stuff that we couldn't otherwise do.
Right.
I'd say right now we're doing stuff that other people weren't. Well, people weren't doing. They didn't have time to do in order to widen their audience. But at NewsQuest, it was the efficiency drive. It was very much the purpose was at the point before the AI came in, and I didn't. I was brought in to implement it to not. I didn't come up with the process. But
Hmm.
before
Okay.
it came in, I believe that the reporters were kind of chained to their desk, not literally, but in the office at the desk because they had this problem with. They had to fill the newspapers before the print deadline, and their
Mm.
resources were tight. So reporters didn't have. It would take too much time. It wouldn't fill up enough column inches if they went out and to council meetings or court cases or a village fair. Um, to interview people.
Yeah.
So
Can we rewind just
yeah,
zoom out a little bit? Give a little background on NewsQuest and what it does, just so
yeah.
that
So
people are clear.
yeah, of course. So Newsquest is one of the UK's biggest local newspaper publishers.
Mhm.
In the UK, it's basically three newspaper publishers who own most of the local newspapers. So there's about 200 titles across the UK.
Wowzers. All
Yeah.
right.
So then uh, they brought in this use of well-known LLM to
Mhm.
to uh,
I can guess.
to write a first draft of a news article.
Okay.
So um, and then I was brought in and the team. So the mitigation, obviously, the risk is inaccuracy, right? The
Sure.
adding in errors, and the mitigation was to bring in fact checkers. So I was at the helm of these fact checkers, or sometimes called in this world called humans in a loop, right?
Mhm.
These guys were checking the original source, checking the first draft, and then they were doing any other changes they needed to do.
Mhm.
And NewsQuest, it was clearly decided by at NewsQuest that this was a success because, and it was an efficiency because they were growing the team at great. at a great speed. By the time I left, there were 15 people in the team fact checking, and I think there might be around 23 now already, and that's only a few weeks ago. So it's growing really, really quickly. And if you look at journalist jobs at the moment in the UK, it's news quest, news quest, news quest, news quest.
Interesting. So, just to sort of in terms of the strategic goal here, it's like, okay, you have a bunch of local papers and publications, and they need to do a certain amount of content on all of these beats. And they wanted to, I assume, either maintain that level or increase it with either the same amount or more people, right? So, in other words, like,
They were
I would
using
imagine,
they're freeing up the other reporters to go and do those more complicated stories that take longer and maybe uncertain. You might put in a bit of work and it might not end up with content. So they can go to the council meetings they couldn't go to the court cases they couldn't go to. So that's the idea. It's freeing up the
got it.
reporters.
I'm glad you clarified because it's like I think it's important to sort of understand when a newsroom, a particularly local paper, like starts to use these generative tools for news, as it sounds like NewsQuest is doing. That, well, it can't speak for every organization, but it's a way to ensure you're still covering the news, but also ensuring that when you have reporters, that they're spending the time on the things that really human input and attention is most valuable, and the differentiated reporting, right? Because there's a lot of fear, and some of it justified, of like, oh, we're just going to have essentially pink slime content farms, and those exist. Not those are
Mm.
generally not news organizations, and with a few infamous exceptions over the past couple of years, but um it sounds like this is kind of like the big picture look at applying this idea of AI written stuff that is then fact checked. And so it's interesting. So they're really ramping up that part of the operation to get news out there in all of these localities, with experienced fact checkers in the loop. Sounds like.
And I also really like when he said pink slime. Have you heard this term AI slop, which is being used
Yeah,
more and more?
there's a lot of different
I love
terms
it.
for it. Yeah, exactly. AI slop, pink slime,
Yeah,
we used to call it gray slime at Media Copilot for a bit.
yeah,
Slime and slop, and it's all just kind of this gunk,
yeah.
which I think is a fair assessment of a lot of what passes for quote unquote content. I'm not including reporting, like, that's checked into that pile. Um, but it is a problem online for sure.
Mm.
Uh,
And it's something that really, when I got this chance to start this new venture, I it was so obvious to me that if you are going to use generative AI, one of the really important things is that you start with really good quality content originally. So either it's from a really reliable source,
mhm.
or it's gone through this journalistic rigor. So that's why I partnered up with one of the best audio production companies in the country, like they're award winning. Their audio, they're really experienced journalists who know how to scrutinize. And so by the time that they've finished finessed their audio, it's all good, accurate, trustworthy information that then you're putting through these generative AI tools to extract quotes, make Instagram pictures, make TikTok reels from. But you have to start with
Yeah.
good quality content. And there's so much
Yeah,
opportunity for
absolutely.
that as well now, right? There's so much more reliable content out there. Often called OSINT, open source investigations, open source data that you can get hold of. So I feel like there's loads of opportunity there with um, helping put that into a different version. Like we have the Office of National Statistics in the UK, which does these really cool stuff with not everyone's a numbers person, so they reversion. And I don't think all of this is a generative AI, by the way.
Mhm.
This is from before as well, which is worth pointing out. We don't always have to use generative AI. But
Mhm.
they take their numbers and they put them into graphs. Helps for some people, visualizing, and they put them into words as well. So they turn it into sentences. For me, that's the best. I mean, ultimately, if the ONS are listening and they want to make their content for me, then they have to use a synthetic voice and turn it into audio. But
Right.
maybe one day.
Well, I think one day, and it probably coming sooner than later. So we've been talking a lot about reversioning, and I think freeing up human time, and I think that is like obviously the cornerstone of what you're doing. And I feel like it's the thing that I feel persuades journalists, skeptical journalists about AI the most, because I always this is something I often observe, which is that over the past 15 years or so, journalists, reporters, and editors sort of had to become, in addition to good reporters and editors, content marketers for their own content. And everything you described at the outset of all this manual reversioning that we always had to do. We had to get social tweets for every story. We had to probably, at the very least, advise on video content or text content if it's going from one to the other, and just kind of like live in that social conversation around a story and all this stuff. When some of that, is kind of satisfying, but some of it isn't, particularly when you talk about SEO. And if we can offload the bulk of that work to AI, so much the better. And I feel like that's really sort of gets people who previously spent a lot of time doing that on board and sort of, okay, if I can sort of, this is a good efficiency. Now the reversioning, we'd be remiss if we're talking about reversioning to not mention Notebook LM,
Mm.
which of course is the Google a Gemini powered folder, use AI on your content, um, kind of feature. And one of the interesting little aspects of it, of course, which got a huge amount of press recently, is that it can turn it into a podcast. You have a
Yeah.
bunch of files. You can obviously get converse with that data, but it'll also turn it into like a roughly 5-10 minute podcast for you to listen to. And it's all, cool voices and all this stuff. And now there's not that many features on it, there's not many controls on it, but I think it got people's imagination going in so many ways. And now there's no doubt more features and more controls coming, but I feel like it's really pointing the way into this idea of like, oh, you know what, I like this content. Why can't I just have it however I want it? Why do I have to stop at a podcast? Why not
Absolutely, that's
uh
my dream.
yeah.
Like, my dream is that everyone can communicate their message in the way they will be best to communicate it. So
Mhm.
maybe would prefer rather than I'm loving this chat, but maybe I'd prefer to think about it and write 300 words, for example,
Mm.
and then everyone can receive the message in the way they find best. So for me, like I said, audio. I'd rather be walking down the street listening than reading reading some text, and I use Pocket a lot to turn. I love that feature in all
Oh,
these
Pocket, yeah. Yeah, Pocket's
in all
great.
these I mean it's not it's not phased very much, the feature of play being able to play your audio, but I absolutely love it. For me, it transforms it. It means that I read so much more, or I take in so much more information. So I'm really excited about synthetic voices getting better. But yeah, that's on that same theme of hopefully we can have this kind of world where one person can say something in the way they best find it easiest to say, and another person can receive that message in the way they find easiest. And the only thing that I would say against audio is WhatsApp audio notes. I
Mhm.
mean, I don't know. Maybe I feel old when people send me those. I feel like, what are you doing? Why are you sending me? Just message me. But
Right.
it's
You can't process it as quickly. That's sort of the problem. You need to
yeah,
actually listen to the notes. Yeah.
yeah.
It's
They
an
should,
interesting feature, and the people do use them because it is super convenient, like as the person sending the message,
mm,
but it's also less convenient for the person absorbing the message. And I feel like there's going to be, well, right now I'm sure you could get a transcript. I'm actually not sure
yeah.
of that on WhatsApp, but
I haven't seen it on WhatsApp, but it seems so obvious that you
yeah,
should be able to transcribe that and just read it. Like
yeah,
that would be
totally.
so much, and then that person can talk for however they they want to.
I feel
Um,
like, and again, I think we need to sort of talk a bit about what are the ethics around disclosure, when you're doing all this kind of stuff because it sort of gets really complicated really quickly. So if you think about like there's a debate, not really a debate, I think it's mostly settled, but the idea of altering photos to remove objects and things like that
Mm,
is a thing that has become very democratized, right? It used to be something you needed skills in Photoshop, and now they have automatic tools to take out things like cables or things in the background and whatever. And it's like, oh, that's super convenient. And then you can start taking out whole people, and you can take out people from the front. Like it's just as easy for software. And then you kind of start thinking, well, wait a minute, what even is a photo anymore? And this recently came up with regard to Apple because they're starting to introduce these features. They're much more common in things like Lightroom and whatever else, but now that they're in these sort of very, ubiquitous consumer apps, there's a real sort of discussion to be had on like, well, what's okay now that software has democratized this idea, and I feel like that same idea is now very quickly going to be applied to all content, right? Because if you think about an interview like the one we're doing right now, it would be conceptually trivial to turn our conversation here into a 5-minute version, with AI filling in the gaps by simulating our voices and our likenesses to make sure it's all very smooth, but that wasn't the conversation. You know
yeah.
what I mean? Like, but we're gonna get to that world very, very quick. I mean, we could do it now with some complexity, but I feel like within a year or 2, just doing 5-minute version in a drop down and clicking it will make it automatic. So what do we have to do to ensure that we preserve convenience, but also preserve, integrity? And I think it
Mm.
starts with disclosures, right?
Integrity, yeah. For me, integrity is that's. I think the journalism world, its use of generative AI can help, and our prioritization of accuracy, integrity, will could help the rest of um, other industries who are also grappling with how best to use generative AI, but us specifically have this really keen focus on accuracy,
Mhm.
truth, trust. Um, with the photos, with our tool we're working. By the way, we called it Podmorph, but it's a working title. Uh,
Hmm, I get
with
it.
our tool, we're
Better than Podymorph.
Podmorph. I like it. um, so with Podmorph, we have really been working out that fine line of which. So we're using background image, just generating it, of what is acceptable, and it's really clear to us that it's not acceptable to have anything which is hyper realistic. And this isn't just the depiction of somebody's face, like you mentioned earlier. It isn't just
Mhm,
maybe the depiction of a location, but it's anything which looks realistic, because we're in a situation right now where people are starting to worry that they won't know what is true anymore. So
mhm,
if we
totally.
can say, look, we won't use anything that looks realistic. So we'll only do animation, illustration, which graphics, which is clearly not photo, right? Anything hyper realistic, photorealistic, we just won't do it. So if it is, then it's a real, authentic picture. And this reminds me of and what you said about the integrity of editing. I was like, well, you edit video and you edit
Sure.
audio all the time and put them together to make it fit into a certain amount of time to take out the most interesting points. To help
Mhm,
the audience consume it. And as long as you're doing it with an integrity, you're not trying to mislead. And that is where the journalistic professional integrity comes in, that I'm trying to inform you in the most interesting, entertaining way, perhaps, to help you digest this information. And I won't mislead. I won't, if somebody says one thing once and then says the opposite 10 times, I won't just use that one thing unless it's genuinely the truth. I won't
mhm,
try and make it like this person is uh not what they actually are. And you
yeah,
and you have to trust me. So we already do that. We already whether the audience know, that's the other thing. We don't really know how much the audience know about how we make factual content.
Hmm.
But we have this journalistic integrity, and that's going to be really important in the generative AI world as well. Um, Now, with that in mind, I've been thinking a lot about stock images recently.
Okay.
So as a BBC News website writer for many years, us, just like many other online news services, used stock images when we didn't have anything else to
Sure.
illustrate it and to break up the text. It was always, I felt, a compromise. But
Hmm. It's
and
kind of chore.
sometimes it isn't necessarily clear to the audience that it's a stock image. So
Hmm.
then we were trying out this using stock images to make the videos, and we scrapped the idea um, on Podmorph. But it made me think, oh gosh, there's so many things that were done in journalism that we'll have to question now, because we have to be even clearer than we were before about what is real. And maybe that includes stock images. Maybe we just have to say, for us guys, if it's coming from us, we don't use any stock images at all. If we need a picture of somebody drinking a cup of tea because we're doing a story
Hmm.
about how tea prices are rising, then we'll use an animation or an illustration because they're much better nowadays. But we won't use
Hmm.
a stock image of an actor drinking a cup of tea, for example. I don't know. It's just an
Interesting.
idea that I've been thinking about recently, about how there are practices in journalism which were okay in one era, and maybe now we have to be so more careful about our integrity, factual accuracy. Now that it's easy to create content which looks real, that we need to question, perhaps.
Yeah, I think it's a good guideline for a couple of reasons. One is that it sort of forces the publication to think about the style of that illustration and perhaps use it as a sort of consistent style, which yeah, I think creates opportunity for artistic statement and even work like a job that someone doing that, a creative director. It also definitely signals this isn't real, right? And which is the whole point. But besides that, there's this falseness even to AI imagery. Like, you're when you put an AI image in something, even if you with a label, you're kind of forcing an experience on the reader where they're kind of like, oh, wait, like you have this moment of, is that even AI? Like you're forcing them to think about that, and then by extension think about the integrity of the whole organization and publication they're looking at, right? Whereas if it's something that is so obviously unreal the moment you see it, that whole dilemma, I guess, or whatever you want to call it, is sort of put aside. So I think it's a really smart recommendation. Very, very cool. Well, you brought up the BBC, and I know we don't have that much time left. I did want to ask about your experience there because I know that I was actually kind of admired their initial statement on generative AI when they came out and they gave sort of their three principles about it. This was in late 2023, I want to feel like about a year ago. So, tell me a little bit about like their approach to AI and with regard to obviously it's a huge organization and they also have entertainment and news and whatever else, but with regard to news experiences and whatever else, what have they done that's been notable and what have they gotten right, and if you're comfortable talking about it, what have they maybe what do they need to work on?
So I was working in the prototyping team when ChatGPT came out, and we were actually working with GPT-3. Uh,
Oh wow, very cool.
Before that, before the
Yeah,
ChatGPT
before
came
before
out.
the hype.
So, of course, whilst at that point BBC had some broader, very sensible AI guidelines, which I remember one of them was along the lines of, think about it, do you actually have to use AI? Which I still think to myself now, do I actually have to use AI for this thing? Um, while they had that, they that I think the after ChatGPT came out, there was a tightened focus on generative AI and what it meant for the BBC,
Mhm.
and they temporarily banned all generative AI while they convened and decided what their principles and guidelines were.
Mhm.
So for me, that was quite interesting because we were actually working with GPT-3 at that point. Um, and but we did end up making a prototype which was used as an example of a good use of generative AI in when they did eventually publish the guidelines. Um, I think so. The prototype we made, I think, gives a example, a good kind of example of what
Mm.
worked well, which is we we were using it as more of a coach for journalists to help journalists. So it seems so normal
Interesting.
now. It was just a headline helper. It was just to suggest
Mhm.
potential headlines if you're struggling to write a headline, but not to write them for you, just to suggest it for inspiration, and it's your responsibility in the end to write it. And it was really,
Right.
really successful with journalists, and the journalists we tested on really liked it and really were happy to have help with their headlines when they're stressed writing a story quite um, quickly as possible, really, whilst remaining accurate. Um, and I think that is a really good way of approaching AI, generative AI, in keeping away from, well, keeping in that realm of, well, you know what, if it gets it wrong, if it adds in an inaccuracy, there are multiple steps that a journalist is definitely going to do before this is published. So
Mhm.
that risk is mitigated, right? So I think that's a being the coach kind of thing is a really good use of generative AI, which um, I think at the point when I left BBC was going down. I also think it's the a lot of the guidelines and principles that have come out are essentially saying be a good journalist.
Mhm.
So that is
Mm.
another thing that we need to reinforce is if you understand what being a good journalist is, then you're going to be able to, with a little bit of understanding of how these models work, you're going to be fine because you're going to put in the safeguards that you need to make sure you don't create AI slop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody wants the slop. This is great. I usually end by asking something forward looking about projecting out a few years, but I feel like we've kind of done that. But I would like to know, particularly for my listeners, it might be in either local newsrooms, smaller newsrooms, or more closer to the beginning of their journey with AI, and or might be feeling like what's the best way to sort of uh, tread further in and take the next step. What advice do you have for media organizations and journalists that want to go deeper into this stuff?
Look at no code tools. So rather than make a prototype without a software engineer by looking at Zapier or Zapier, do you say Zapier?
I
Make
tend to say Zapier just because
Zapier.
it's like zaps. I think that's what they
Oh
like.
yeah, Zapier.
It's not
makes
zapes.
so
Maybe it is. I don't know. It
makes
could
so
be,
much
that could
sense
be the
now.
UK version.
But there's vector shift, and these will help you create a workflow where without using any code. And then once you've proved a need for once you've tested the output, you should always just have a go, test the output, as long as you're not putting anything into a generative AI tool, which is may break some data protection rules. Then have a go at testing the output. See if you think the quality, how the quality is. Try and find out where it can work out in your workflow, and then to create the integrated workflow, use a no-code tool. See if that works, and then once that works, get the software engineers involved.
Nice, nice. Yeah, there's so many no code tools now. It's one of these sort of fundamental things about AI. I feel like it's democratized a lot of things, but one of them is like just even, tool building, and you can just kind of like create an automation for nearly anything in your life that is sort of this tedious digital process. Add a little generative bit in there, and it might not be perfect the first go, but craft your prompt a little better, maybe add a step here and there, and then suddenly you're no longer have to write tweets or whatever, whatever it may be. I guess on that note, I'll ask one last question. How do you use AI in your personal life, if at all?
Corporate speak. So I am really,
Mm,
I'm quite a direct speaker. It's got me in trouble at work. um, I'm quite, yeah. So I
with
use
what?
it. I use
Yeah.
it to request things from managers. So
Oh,
I
it's
write what
funny.
I actually want, and then
Yeah,
I get ChatGPT to tell me how to say it in corporate speak.
that's amazing. So you actually inject some corporate speak into it. I think
Well,
it's
if you
funny.
think
I tried.
about, okay, so we don't
Yeah,
know. If you just think about how
yeah,
ChatGPT is made, we don't know for sure what data it's trained on, but we think it's the whole internet, right?
sure,
And so
roughly.
if you think about what's on the whole of the internet, there's probably a lot more corporate speak on there than there is
Yeah.
than there is like normal day to day language. So it's the expert in corporate speak.
It definitely is. Out of the box, it definitely is. It's funny, most of my interactions are about sort of making it sound more human, but it does make sense. It's really, really good at exactly what you're talking about. So you're really using it to its fullest ability. Claire, this has been amazing. We could go on and on. I feel like I asked only like one third or even one quarter of the questions I wanted to chat with you about. We got to have you back. Where can people get in touch with you if they'd like to?
LinkedIn, just Claire Spencer on LinkedIn. That's where I am nowadays. Really,
Perfect.
yeah.
Well, thanks again. Hope to talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to my conversation with Clare Spencer. If you like what you heard, please just take a minute to leave a rating or review for the Media Copilot in your podcast app. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Media Copilot newsletter and check out mediacopilot.ai for our classes on AI for journalists, marketers, and content creators. Be seeing you in the future.